I hope that you are well and also hope that you are having a good day so far. Today we'll be doing our grade 7 English lesson on pronouns. And yes, we are still doing pronouns because there is quite a long list of lessons under our topic under our chapter of pronouns, right? So we are doing our chapter on pronouns. And before we start, we're going to log on to aplusstudents.ca. Once you've logged on to aplusstudents.ca with our username as well as our password, and then we can choose or select the subject of English language arts. Grade 7. And then we can scroll down up until we get to our chapter of pronouns. Right? And so far, we've almost done all of the lessons under the chapter of pronouns. But today we're going to do two more lessons, and then in our next class or session, we're going to do the last lesson on or under pronouns, right? All right, so our chapter is pronouns. Our subject is English language arts. Grade 7. And in the lessons that we are going to be focusing on under the chapter of pronouns is the pronoun reflexive or intensive? And to use relative pronouns such as who and whom. All right. So when it comes to basically reflexive and intensive pronouns, right? Because we're gonna first have to know the difference between a reflexive pronoun and an intensive pronoun. So far, we've gone over in our previous lesson what a reflexive pronoun is, and we said reflexive pronouns, it ends with self or selves. And it ends with self once the subject is singular, and it ends with selves when the subject is plural. All right. And then today we're also going to find out what an intensive pronoun is compared to a reflexive pronoun, because I specifically asked in one of the lessons, is the pronoun either reflexive or intensive? All right. So a reflexive pronoun, right? We're going to start with the reflexive pronoun. And a reflexive pronoun, it refers back to the subject of the sentence or clause, right? So as much as I first said, reflexive pronouns are self, ends in self or selves, right? But then again, also that is a subject, but the reflexive pronoun, like for example, myself, needs to refer back to I, right? So reflexive pronouns, it needs to refer back to the subject of the sentence or the clause in which they appear. They always they are always objects of a verb or they are prepositions. For example, did Sarah save any of the cookies for herself? You see, this is where I said the herself needing to refer back to the subject, right? And the subject can either be singular or it can be plural. Because remember, I mentioned that with the reflexive pronouns, we have it ends either in self, when it's singular, or selves, and then it needs to refer back to the subject of the sentence. So it says, did Sarah save any cookies for herself? Right? Meaning for herself, for Sarah. So which means that this is a reflexive pronoun because it refers back to Sarah. And like I said, a reflexive pronoun, right, herself refers back to the subject, which is Sarah, right? And it is the object of the preposition for. All right. Then we have an intensive pronoun, right? So we made mention of a reflexive pronoun that refers back to the subject of the sentence or the clause in which they appear. But then we also have an intensive pronoun. All right. So intensive pronouns, it emphasizes or intensifies the noun or the pronoun they refer to. They can refer to any noun or pronoun within a sentence, but not the subject. Intensive pronouns are used to emphasize only. They are not objects of a verb and they are not prepositions, right? For example, no one else was home, so I brought the groceries myself. So no one was home, so I brought the groceries myself. So in this sentence, right, the intensive pronoun myself emphasizes the pronoun I, right? So no one was home, so I brought in the groceries myself. So, like we say, the word myself or the pronoun myself, it emphasizes the pronoun I. Another example is after waiting in line all afternoon, we were finally able to meet the queen herself. So, after waiting in line all afternoon, we were finally able to meet the queen herself, right? And in this case, right, we intensified or we emphasized, right, the pronoun herself, and we put emphasis on the queen. That is intensive pronouns. It's like we are emphasizing or intensifying the noun or the pronoun that we're referring to. And here we are referring to the queen herself, right? So the reflexive pronoun, it refers back to the subject of the sentence or the clause in which they appear. And the intensive pronouns, it emphasizes, it doesn't refer back, it emphasizes or intensifies the noun or the pronoun that they refer to. Right? All right. Now, if there's one way to tell if a pronoun is either reflexive or if it is intensive, right? Then we can basically try to replace it with an object pronoun, right? And an object pronoun is words like either me or her or us. So if we want to tell if the pronoun is either reflexive or intensive, then we can try and replace it with the object like me or her or us, right? And if you can replace it with an object pronoun and still have a complete sentence, then it is a reflexive pronoun. And if it cannot, then we call that an intensive pronoun. And an example of that is, did Sarah save any of the cookies for herself? And in this case, it's like it says, did Sarah save any cookies for herself? The second one says, did Sarah save any cookies for him? Right? And if we look at, let's say we look specifically at these two words, right? Herself and him. If we replace, let's say, him with herself, and we can still have a proper sentence that and then we call this a reflexive pronoun, right? So it says you can replace herself with the object pronoun him and then still have a sentence, then that is a reflexive pronoun. No one else was home, so I brought the groceries myself. And if we are going to replace maybe that word myself with an object pronoun her, then we say no one else is home, so I brought in the groceries her. That does not that doesn't sound like a proper sentence. You see, no one else was home, so I brought the groceries her, because we replace her now with myself. Her is an object. And if we replace this sentence with an object, then it does not show a sentence. It's not a proper sentence, which means that this is an intensive pronoun. Because if you cannot replace myself with an object pronoun, right, then in this case, in this sentence doesn't work, then it means that this is, or that pronoun is an intensive pronoun. All right, so there we have now the difference between a reflexive pronoun and a intensive pronoun. And remember, an intensive pronoun, it shows intense, or it shows, it's like we are putting emphasis, right, on the person that we are discussing. All right, so a relative pronoun. So now we're going to relative pronouns. And a relative pronoun introduces a relative clause that describes a noun or a pronoun. And remember, a pronoun basically just takes the place of a noun, right? So noun can either be your name, like your actual name, and then the pronoun can maybe be words like he, she, they, her, and so on. And the relative pronouns who and whom give information about people. It's either who it is or whom, right? To figure out whether to use the word who or to use the word whom, we need to restate the relative clause with a personal pronoun. And if the clause uses a subject pronoun such as he, she, or they, then we use who. So if the clause uses a subject pronoun he, she, or they, remember a subject pronoun we'll usually find at the beginning of a sentence, then we use who. But if the clause uses an object pronoun that we'll usually find, like, the middle of a sentence, and the object pronoun are words like him, her, or them, then we use whom. So we use the pronoun, the relative clause who, when we refer to a subject pronoun he, she, or they, and we use the relative pronoun, the relative clause whom, if we refer to an object pronoun such as him, her, or them. And if we look at an example, right, it says the woman who lives next door grows tomato in her garden. So who lives next door? Right? So we can say she lives next door. Who is she? The woman. All right, and another example would be like Peter, whom you met yesterday, has 4 younger brothers. So who did we meet yesterday? You met him yesterday. And who is him? He is Peter. Right? So we then add the relative clause, which is whom, to our object pronoun. Right? All right. So that is now we're going to our A plus students.ca, where we are going to do our test, right? And we're going to the first one, which is the pronoun reflexive or intensive? So we're going to say, is the subject, not the subject, but the pronoun either reflexive or is the pronoun intensive? And remember, we said that a reflexive pronoun, it refers back to the subject of the sentence or clause in which they appear. They are always objects of a verb or preposition. Whereas intensive pronouns, right, it emphasizes or intensifies the noun or pronoun that they refer to, right? They can refer to any noun or pronoun within the sentence, but they do not refer to the subject of the sentence. So the intensive pronoun, it is used to emphasize only, not used as an object of a verb or preposition, right? All right, so now we're going to our test. So now we're going to say, is the pronoun in bold either reflexive or is it intensive? So we will either choose option 1 or option 2. So it says, at 3 o'clock, the conductor and I needed to excuse ourselves briefly from the rehearsal to discuss the symphony schedule. So at 3, the conductor and I needed to excuse ourselves briefly from the rehearsal to discuss the symphony schedule. So we need to say if that word ourselves is either reflexive or intensive. All right, and if we were to choose the correct one, we would say the conductor and I, right? It refers to we, and ourselves refers back to we. So we can maybe say that's a reflexive pronoun because it refers back to our subject. When the revolutionaries stormed the city, the emperor and I disguised ourselves as peasants and escaped. So when the revolutionaries stormed the city, the emperor and I disguised ourselves as peasants and escaped. We need to say if this is an intensive pronoun or is it a reflexive pronoun. So ourselves, that word. All right. So if we were to choose the correct, and then we will choose because ourselves refers to the emperor and I refers to we. We are new. We are new year ourselves, he said as he shook my hand. We are new year ourselves, he said as he shook my hand. And if we were to choose the correct one, ourselves refers to, oh, it's an intensive pronoun. It shows emphasis, right? So it shows emphasis or intensifies the noun. All right. While recovering from a sprained ankle, my cousin had to use crutches to support herself. So while recovering from a sprained ankle, my cousin had to use crutches to support herself. We need to say if it's an intensive pronoun, it emphasizes the noun, or is it a reflexive pronoun? And a reflexive pronoun, remember, it always refers back to our subject. Like herself refers back to my cousin, just can be she. All right. And a reflexive pronoun is correct. All right, so now we're going on to the next lesson, which is using the relative pronouns who and whom. And remember, we said that we use a relative pronoun who and whom to give information about people, right? And we can use the word who, right? If the clause uses a subject pronoun, which refers to he, she, or they. And if the clause uses an object pronoun such as him, her, them, we use whom. All right. And we already made a few examples of whom or who. If we look at an activity before we go to our test, right, on relative pronouns who or whom, it says, let's complete the sentence with the best relative pronoun. In 1615, French explorer Samuel de Champlain explored the interior of Canada with the Hurons and tribe of Native Americans. The tribe of Native Americans, we now need to say who or whom Chaplin lived with and wrote about. So we're going to have to choose the word who or the word whom to basically correct that sentence. And if we were to reread that sentence, then we can say, in 1615, French explorer Samuel de Champlain explored the interior of Canada with Hurons and tribe Native Americans whom Champlain lived with and wrote about. Right? So, whom? It's like the people that he lived with. He lived with them. Right? So, we can say whom he lived with and wrote about. So, whom is yes. So, yeah, they say whom because it refers to them. Because he lived with them. Right? All right. It says, where are we? In 1957, musician Louis Armstrong canceled a US government sponsored trip to the Soviet Union to show support for 9 African American students. We need to say is it who or whom National Guardsmen had blocked from entering an all white high school in Arkansas. We need to say if we need to add the correct word, such as either who or whom. And it says in 1957, musician Louis Armstrong canceled a US government sponsored trip to the Soviet Union to show support for 9 African American students. And we can say whom. National Guardsmen had blocked from entering an all white high school in Arkansas. So, which means that the National Guardsmen blocked them from entering an all white high school in Arkansas. So, that is why we use the word whom. Yes, and whom is correct because the National Guardsmen blocked them. Remember, we said that we use the object, we use the relative pronoun whom when the object he, she, or they is being referred to. All right, and then we have the next one that says the coral reef off the southern coast of the island is a favorite spot for local divers and snorkelers. Several of who, not who, but whom Aaron accompanied on his last underwater excursion, meaning that Aaron accompanied them on their last underwater excursion, right? And that refers to whom refers to them, right? And that is correct. All right, so now we're going to our test where we're going to use a relative pronoun and we are going to either fill in are we using who or whom within that sentence. Who refers to a subject of a sentence and whom refers to an object of a sentence. So we're going to complete the sentence with the best relative pronoun, either who or whom. Sorry. Janet Guthrie. Do we say who was an engineer and pilot by training, became the first female race car diver to compete in the Indianapolis 500? Or do we say Janet Guthrie, whom was an engineer and pilot by training, became the first female race car diver to compete in the Indianapolis 500? So we need to select either who or we need to select whom. All right, so if we refer to Janet, which is our subject pronoun, right, then we can say Janet Guthrie, who, because she's the subject, was an engineer and pilot by training. Right, so if we're referring to the subject of the sentence, then we use the word who. And if we're referring to the object, then we use whom. All right, we're going to the next one. It says, complete the sentence with the best relative pronoun. In 2014, sailors, do we say who were members of the Polynesian Voyaging Society embarked on a 3-year journey around the world using only traditional navigation techniques of the ancient Polynesians and Hawaiians? Or do we say in 2014 sailors whom were members? Either who were members or whom were members. Which one do you think it is? We're referring to the sailors. Are we saying sailors who or sailors whom? All right, so if we were to choose the correct one, if we're referring to the sailors, then we can say who were members. At the community meeting last night, city officials condemned the land developers. Do we say whom or who? The wetlands for construction. Drained the wetlands for construction. So we must either say if it's whom or who. And if we were to select the correct one, we will say whom, because they drained the wetlands for construction. Oh, who? Oh, the city officials. So who it is. All right, the last one. In 1876, Annie Oakley, a markswoman and star of Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, married Frank E. Butler, a sharpshooter and performer. She had defeated in a shooting competition the previous year. So we're saying, do we say who she had defeated or whom she had defeated? All right, so we can say whom she had defeated because she defeated him, right? All right, so that is the end of our lesson now on pronouns. Like I said, we still have one more lesson to go on pronouns. On our next lesson, we are definitely doing pronouns and the last lesson on pronouns. But for now, thank you very much for joining the class. I really hope that you do know the difference between the reflexive and intensive pronouns and how to use whom and when to use who. All right. Should have a good evening further. Goodbye.